A few weeks ago, I built a custom Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria in Minecraft with the use of the Management Wanted mod. Now, while I never use mods like these in my videos, I had a lot of fun messing around with custom blocks and models to do something that I wouldn't be able to in normal Minecraft. However, I was still curious if I could do this without the mod and wanted to see how it would turn out if I added my own custom gameplay alongside it. And today, I'm going to be doing just that, where I'm going to rebuild my custom FNAF location and then add working gameplay to it, all in vanilla Minecraft. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Before we do though, I want to say that if custom builds like these are something that you're interested in, be sure to subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on, so that way you're notified the next time I make one. It's completely free and it helps out a whole lot more than you know. Now, even though I've technically already built this exact same build before, I've still gone ahead and outlined everything so that way I can recreate it as closely as possible. The mod puts lots of details inside just a single block, so I'll have to come up with creative ways to make this work without it. And while I'm not using mods to make this, I am still going to be using custom map art again for the checkered patterns on the walls. Now, these designs are a little bit different than normal, as you can see that they didn't take up the whole map, meaning when I put them onto an item frame, it's not going to take up the full frame and still shows off parts of the build. And if you're curious as to how to make transparent backgrounds, it's as simple as putting a layer of glass over the void, which is then only going to make the pattern itself part of the map. I have to be honest though, this is the most excited I've been to start on a build like this, as this time it's going to be something I've made myself that's not from an already existing game. And now without the use of mods, I'm really excited to see how this is going to turn out. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started working on the build. And that is now the build completely done, and honestly I think this turned out really well and a lot better than I thought it was going to. I built the original pizzeria with lots of different colors, and this one looks even more colorful since all of the decorations are now 1 block wide. Now there are a few differences between the original decorations and these new ones, but pretty much everything is here and in the exact same place as before. Of course there's all the map art on the walls like how I went over earlier, but there's also some custom decorations around the build like these custom player heads for gumball machines, presents, party hats, and a few other things. However, the one that definitely stands out the most are the plushies of the core 4 animatronics, as just because the modded build had custom models for them, it doesn't mean that I wasn't going to add them for this world as well. Now each one is a shrunken down armor stand model with different armor and player heads, and these are made in the exact same way that I make my actual animatronics themselves. With that being said, I did limit the entities to just being item frames and the plushie models, as if I really wanted to, I could have made this build just as detailed as the modded one by making every single prop out of armor stands. I brought up this exact topic in that original video, but I also need to consider how well the game itself is going to run, especially since I still have to add the gameplay as well. Speaking of which, we might as well get started with the gameplay, as I already have a lot of ideas in mind on how I want this game to work. Obviously, I'm going to be sitting right here inside the office, so let's go ahead and start by making some office mechanics. Now the office is fairly simple with its layout, as it's just a small rectangle in the corner of the circle, I guess you could say. Because of that, there's only one way to get through this doorway here, which I'm going to be adding a sliding door to. Instead of sliding up and down though, the frames of this door are going to be moving from left to right. So there's a frame of the door fully closed, then one when it's half opened or closed, and then one when the door is fully opened. Now these frames are then going to be copied up into the build with a clone command after I flick the lever that's next to the desk. That's right, I'm using a lever instead of a button, as not only is it a bit more realistic, but this is also my game and I can do whatever I want. However, the door isn't going to immediately close the moment the lever powers, as I thought it would be fun to have a small delay that powers the door mechanic up first before the clone commands are then going to power. Now this is really just a cosmetic change, but it might also have a purpose when adding in the animatronics later. So with a few added sound effects to go along with it all, the full sequence is going to look like this, where I flick the lever and the door is going to close about a second later. Then to open it back up again, I just simply flick the lever again, and the same sequence is going to play in reverse. Now to make sure that I can't just spam the lever, I've set up an interaction entity to teleport over the lever while the command's powered, which is going to stop me from turning off the lever while the door is trying to close. Then when the animation ends, it teleports back under the block again, and I'm able to flick the lever again. As with all FNAF doors though, there needs to be some kind of punishment for leaving it closed for too long, as then I could just keep it closed for the entire night, which I obviously don't want. But instead of running on a global power system like with FNAF 1, the door is only going to temporarily break after a set amount of time passes. Now before I look inside of this command block, I feel that I should warn you that I do have a mod installed that doesn't add anything, but will make reading the commands much easier. Normally I would only be able to see one command at a time, but this mod lets me look at an entire chain of commands at once, while also spacing out the commands themselves. This has been extremely helpful for me, and hopefully it means that I'll make more sense as I'm explaining things. The link for this mod will be in the description down below. But to get the timer to work, I have a scoreboard that's going to start increasing the moment the door closes once the door timer has been set to 1, and is going to keep on counting up until it matches 200 ticks or 30 real life seconds. That's where the second command block is then going to stop the timer by keeping it at 200 ticks, as the door is then going to break by putting the lever back to normal and stops me from being able to power the door. However, if I open the door back up before the score matches 200, the second command here is then going to start removing 1 from the scoreboard, which is then going to bring it back down to 0, where it's then going to stay until I close the door again. So the door does still technically run on a power system, but the power will start filling up again when the door is no longer being used. Now what happens if the door power does get set to 200? Well, another score called door cooldown is then going to get set to 1, which is then going to block the lever in the office by teleporting the interaction on top of it when the score is between 1 and 900, or about 45 real life seconds. So the cooldown does mean that I will be able to use the door again later, but only after the cooldown timer ends and the interaction gets removed from the lever. So during this time, any animatronic will be able to get inside the office, which is why I want to make sure that I don't have the door closed for too long. With the door currently closed, you can see how the scoreboard is going up, and eventually the door breaks and opens back up as the cooldown itself is going to start. Now eventually it is going to fix itself, however this is only going to happen after a total of 900 ticks have passed. When that happens, a sound cue is then going to play, indicating I can now close the door again. It's a neat mechanic that only needs a simple system to work. The next feature to add is once again another classic FNAF mechanic, which is a flashlight to see through the doorway itself. Normally I would have an item to throw or a button to press to do this, but this time I've done things a little bit differently. Different doesn't mean complicated though, as directly next to me in the office is another interaction entity on the side of the doorway, and right clicking on it will cause this command block here to activate. This is then going to remove all of the black concrete from in front of the doorway, and then adds extra light blocks to the hallway to actually brighten up the area itself. Then when I right click on the interaction a second time, it's then going to turn the flashlight off by removing all of those light blocks and placing the concrete back in place. Now the reason why there's more commands on the other side and even a scoreboard setup is so that way the flashlight is only going to stay on when I'm looking towards the doorway and then turns off when I look away from it. This lengthy command here is what does that, which detects when I'm not looking at the interaction entity, which is then going to set the score back to 0 and is going to put all of the black concrete back in place. Other than that, there aren't any additional mechanics to the flashlight like a battery, as I wanted to keep using it for something that I think will be pretty cool later on. Before we get there though, the last office mechanic is of course the camera system, as a classic pizzeria sit and survive can't work without them. And I decided to get a bit creative with this one and do something that I've never done before, which is to have each camera work on its own individual monitor. I've also probably overdone the decorations on the desk itself to make it look more polished, and added a spinning desk fan with a phone right next to it, a mouse for the monitors, and most importantly, a cup of tea to have throughout the night. I also thought it would be fun to personalize things even further by adding small figures of my favorite games outside of Minecraft and FNAF, with those being a Helldiver from Helldivers 2, the Doom Slayer from Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, and a Reaper Leviathan from Subnautica. I meant what I said when I told you that I was going to go all out with this build. This is my game and I can do whatever I want with it. But it also just adds more character to the office, as if the Night Guard is bringing a small part of their collection with them, with that of course being me. And this is easily my favorite office setup that I've ever made. Aside from all of that, having the desk fan actually move from side to side and having the camera monitors cycle between a static screen, it's such a small detail that still adds so much more to the build. But as for the cameras themselves though, I've done the exact same thing as the flashlight, where there's an interaction in front of each camera monitor, and right clicking on them is then going to teleport me to that set camera position. Then to return back to the office, there's another interaction that I can click on, which is then going to teleport me right back to where I was standing. The same thing goes for every other camera, however there's still a few more things that need to be added before this camera system becomes fully functional. First off, I've set up a teleport command that not only stops me from moving around, but also locks my view to a certain Y level. This might sound weird at first, but what it does is stops me from being able to look wherever on the camera, and now I can only look straight from left to right. Now this would also work if I had a system that forced me to rotate in a set direction, but I still want to be able to control the camera and look around freely. The only difference with this is for the parts and service camera, which I thought would be fun to mix up by having it be an audio only camera just like the kitchen in FNAF 1. To stop it from just being a black screen though, I've put some fun text on screen to show off that the camera isn't working. Now keep this in mind, as I'm going to be using this exact same concept again later on. Now it's easy for me to know which camera is where since I built the place, but what about everyone else? Especially with this being a circular building, it can be easy to get lost and confused when looking through each of the cameras. So how about I add a camera map layout to show off which camera is looking where? And by camera map, I mean that literally, as what I'm doing here is drawing the exact same layout of the pizzeria inside of paint.net, which I'm then going to upscale and recreate onto a Minecraft map. I would show off the replay of the build, but I accidentally deleted the recording, so I'll just stick with the original drawing that I made. The canvas size starts as the exact same size as the Minecraft build, where 1 pixel is 1 block, but then I need to upscale it to be 128 by 128, so that way it fills up the map from border to border. On top of that, I also threw in a few extra details, but the main feature is the camera icons, which are going to change color depending which one I'm looking at. Here's what the map now looks like in-game with both the map and the build itself. To color code each of the cameras though, I've made 8 copies of the 8 cameras where I've changed the number background to bright green for each one. So from now on, whenever I use a camera, one of these maps is then going to be put in my offhand, which is then going to display the building layout at the side of my screen just like a normal camera should. Moving on to some of the functional camera features, I want to take a look at the lighting of the pizzeria, as I haven't actually added in any additional light blocks, meaning this is what the pizzeria is going to look like during the night. Since there are so many windows around the place, I wanted to mess around with natural light of the night sky, but I still think it's worth adding in another light source that's able to be controlled through the cameras. Whenever I look at the cameras, this item called Use Spotlight is going to be added to my inventory, which is going to prompt me to remotely turn on a spotlight and add some light to the room. So clicking on the camera interaction with this item in my hand is then going to cause this top scoreboard to be set to 1, which is then going to cause the light blocks to shine in the camera that I'm looking at. On top of that, I've also added a second feature to the cameras, with a speaker system which works in the exact same way, where holding the item and then left clicking will cause music to play in the current camera. Both of these features are going to be different defense mechanics against the animatronics, which does mean that there needs to be some sort of punishment for using them too much. While the mechanic itself works differently from each other, the main idea stays the same, so I'll just go over one example but then show them both off afterward. So taking a look at the spotlight cooldown, this starts by having a power scoreboard countdown from 1000 ticks whenever the spotlight is turned on. When I'm not using the spotlight, however, the countdown is then going to stop and will no longer continue to count down. As it does decrease though, a boss bar at the top of the screen is also going to start going down along with it to properly indicate how much battery power is left before I'm no longer able to use it anymore. Now once the score reaches 0 and the battery goes out, the original command to power the light is no longer going to work, meaning I've now permanently lost that mechanic. And a final detail I've added to go along with this is to change the boss bar color as it's going down, which is done by changing the color of the boss bar itself. So from 50% to 100% the color is going to start at green, then from 25% to 50% it's going to go down to yellow, before finally going to red at 1% to 25%, and then 0 once the power has been completely cut off. Moving over to the speaker now, this also has a boss bar setup but works the other way around, where the longer I use it, the more the bar is going to increase. Now instead of staying there though, the score is going to start counting down again once I turn it off, meaning I could use this as much as I want as long as the bar doesn't reach 100%. This would then cause the speakers to blow out once they lose their durability, and I would once again no longer be able to use that mechanic anymore. So to recap everything I've done so far, we have a flashlight to let us see past the doorway where the door itself can be closed for a short amount of time before it's going to break completely. On the desk there's a spinning fan as long as 8 different monitors, where each one is going to take me to an individual camera around the building. In any other camera I can look freely from left to right, other than this camera right here for parts and service, where only the audio is going to be available. Then finally are the camera features, where we of course have the map at the left side of the screen, as well as a spotlight that's going to light up the room that I'm in, but is slowly going to lose power as I'm doing so. The other mechanic is then a speaker, which is going to use one of the speakers around the building, where using it for too long is then going to cause it to blow out. So overall this is a very solid but fun start to the map, but now it's finally time to put all of these features to proper use and add in the animatronics themselves that I'm going to be up against. But instead of just using the normal classic FNAF 1 characters like I did for the modded build, I want to mix things up and give my own original style to each of them. So let's go ahead and get started. When it comes to modeling animatronics with armor stands, I always like to mess around with different things, by either making them around the size of the player like most of my other maps, or to make them unrealistically massive like in Parts and Service. For this map though, I wanted a mix of the two and made the animatronics around 3.5 blocks tall, while also making sure that they could still actually fit on the stage. If I were to compare this to anything I've done before, these models are most like the gallery display models from my Help Wanted 2 map, where multiple armor stands make up the body, legs, and arms to make them appear much bigger than normal, but while still keeping them at a realistic scale. As for the characters themselves, I wanted to give Freddy a black suit and white undershirt to make him look more classy, while also adding white gloves to his hands and slightly tilting his top hat. Bonnie is the complete opposite of that, where he has no shirt on at all and only has a black tie and red suspenders to hold up his red pants, as well as some shades to complete his rockstar look. With Chica, I really just wanted to see how the model would look with the color scheme of Glam Rock Chica, which I honestly think works quite well. I also went ahead and added a bib to keep with her food theme a bit more, and also added her cupcake on the shoulder to top it off. Finally, with Foxy, I had the idea to give him a blue coat to go with what I actually did, but I realized that that was too similar to Captain Foxy from Help Wanted. However, I still gave him more of a pirate look with a peg leg, a wooden sword, and even a pirate hat with a skull on it. Overall, these designs might be more friendly and colourful than a normal FNAF animatronic, but they will definitely start to look more threatening once their mechanics have been added in. I'm going to start by adding in Bonnie first, as he is the most simple mechanic of the four. Now when he becomes active after a set timer ends, the model is going to teleport over to the walkway just outside of the office, where he's then going to start slowly walking towards it. And I actually mean that he's going to be walking around, as I've just set up a full animation for this, where Bonnie's legs, arms, and head are moving around on a set timer. As you can see, when the timer is between two sets of numbers, this entire chain of command blocks is going to power and changes the rotation values of each armor stand. Now when the timer hits 45, it's then going to reset back to 1, which is going to keep this cycle going over and over. Now as this is playing out, the full model is also going to start slightly moving forward with this teleport command, which is moving Bonnie 0.02 blocks towards the office when the score is matching 15 or more. This is just to slow down Bonnie's movements a little bit more, while also adding a slight stutter to his walk. However, I completely skipped over this entire top part of the command block, which you might recognize as being the same command that turns the office light off if I'm not looking at the doorway. And that's because it is the same command, but just repurposed for Bonnie. Bonnie is only going to move towards the office if I'm not looking at the doorway or if I'm looking at the cameras. Then when I look at him again, the animation and teleport commands are going to pause, and he's no longer going to be able to move. To see this happen in real time with some added sound effects, you can see that Bonnie is currently standing still, but the moment I look away from him, the command block is then going to power again, and now you can hear him slowly stomping towards the doorway. Now because I added some sound effects to Bonnie, those sounds are going to get louder and louder the closer that he gets. So there are two ways to know how close he is, where I can either use the light or just pay attention to his footsteps. I noticed that I never mentioned anything about the flashlight, as Bonnie is still going to stand still whether the flashlight is on or off. As long as I'm looking at the office door, Bonnie is no longer going to move. And if you're curious as to why the light doesn't work on Bonnie, it's because he's wearing sunglasses, and Security Breach showed us exactly what happens if you try and shine a light on an animatronic that's wearing glasses. It does absolutely nothing. Since there's no actual way to repel Bonnie though, he's always going to eventually make it to the office entrance, where you guessed it, I need to close the door to stop him from entering. So if Bonnie is standing within 1.5 blocks away from these coordinates and the lever is powered to close the door, this scoreboard is then going to be set to 1, which is then going to pause Bonnie's movements. Now at the same time, this second scoreboard is going to start increasing, which is how long it's going to take for Bonnie to leave the door. However, if I open the door while the scoreboard is increasing, this third command block is then going to start decreasing the scoreboard, meaning I have to have the door closed for a certain amount of time for Bonnie to be able to leave. However, if that scoreboard matches 150, this next chain of command blocks is going to power, which is then going to teleport Bonnie back to stage and starts his system all over again. This leads me to this last command block right here, which is running a random command to roll a number between 1 and 3. Now the reason for this is so that Bonnie doesn't become active after a set amount of time, but instead within a set time frame. So depending which number gets selected, Bonnie is then going to become active after 20, 25, or 30 seconds. Now this might sound really quick, but remember that Bonnie isn't going to be a threat the entire time that he's active, meaning I still have plenty of time to close the door in his way. Speaking of which, what happens if I don't close the office door in time? Well, the first thing that happens is Bonnie is going to jam the door by teleporting the interaction above the lever again, but what happens after that is where I think things start to get even more tense. Just because Bonnie blocks the doorway, the jump scare doesn't play out instantly, as Bonnie is still going to walk towards me through the doorway and into the office itself. Now after some time passes, I will be able to close the door again now that he's no longer blocking it, but that would mean that Bonnie is now locked in the office with me. Now I can keep looking at him to stop him from moving, but it's only a matter of time before he gets close enough for the jump scare to power. This is a very similar system to the walking cycle, where a timer goes through different animation frames for the jump scare. Now I'll show that off in just a second, but after the jump scare itself ends, I'm then going to be taken to the game over screen, where Bonnie is going to be standing in one corner while a death tip appears on the other. Since there's no phone guy or any instructions on what to do, I thought that this would be the best way to learn the mechanics of the map while also making the game over screen itself much more interesting. So altogether, once Bonnie gets within a certain distance from the desk, he's then going to pick me up and play out his jump scare. Then right after that is the game over room that we just saw, and I just have to left click on the interaction in front of me to teleport back up to the office, where Bonnie then goes back to stage and the night resets for me to try again. It's a very simple system, but also very tense with the lighting and footsteps setup, and I think it makes a great addition for our first animatronic. Up next is Chica, who is probably the complete opposite of Bonnie, as instead of her being the one on the attack, it's actually going to be the cupcake. Whenever Chica becomes active, she's going to appear in one of 3 random positions where she looks towards the camera from the stage room. Throughout this though, you'll notice that the cupcake is completely missing, and that's because it's hiding around the building somewhere, and Chica isn't very happy about that. In total, there are 32 individual hiding places for the cupcake to hide inside the pizzeria. When Chica's timer to power ends and the cupcake's timer starts, a random command is then going to choose which of those positions the cupcake is going to teleport to. If I don't manage to find it and deal with it within the given time, Chica is then going to enter the office and jump scare me. And since I've already added it, we might as well take a look at it, where after about a minute passes and I haven't found the cupcake, Chica is going to teleport right in front of the office door, where you can just see her beak poking through the darkness. This is a small thing that I'm very happy with, as I mentioned that these are bright and colorful characters, but scenes like this make them really look threatening. Now the reason why I haven't looked directly at Chica is because the moment I do, she's instantly going to charge inside the office and power the jump scare, sending me to the game over room. It's a lot faster paced than with Bonnie, but I think it works even better. So with that mechanic added, if I don't find the cupcake in time and Chica appears at the doorway, technically I don't have to look at Chica and I can still stop her from jump scaring me. However, remember that Bonnie is also active at the same time, and the only way to stop him is by looking at him. So I'm not able to close the door or look at Bonnie while this is happening, meaning one of the 2 of them are going to end the run, and the only thing that can save me is getting to 6 AM. Obviously I don't want it to be up to random timings though, so let's see how to deal with the cupcake and get Chica back on stage. Whenever the cupcake hides around the building, it has a set score to match the position that it's hiding in. So here for example, it's just hiding on top of the arcade table and its position scoreboard is set to 28. Now this is one of the more visible hiding places, as I did get pretty creative and maybe a bit too sneaky with some of the other spots. Sometimes the cake will be hiding inside of other objects around the building, like that arcade machine, or other times it will try to blend in with the environment itself, where you can see right there it's hiding in between those 2 plushies on the shelf. I tried to do one of these types of hiding places for every camera, so that way there's not an unlimited amount of hiding spots to look at, but it's still challenging to find them every time. However, the cupcake is sometimes different, like for parts and service, as since I can't actually see inside of this room, it would be unfair for the cupcake to hide inside of it. So what it's going to do instead is hide inside of the office, like right on top of the camera monitors. This is a fun way to mix things up while also being an extra challenge, as I might not think of just checking right behind me on top of the lockers. With that said, the way to deal with the cupcake might be one of the best things I've ever done, as I have to punch the cupcake to scare it off back to Chica. I'm taking this fan game very seriously, as you can tell. Outside of the office though, I'm not able to whack the cupcake through the cameras, so I'll have to use something else. And that's where the speaker system gets its use, as once the audio power scoreboard is between 45 and 55 while it's turned on, this command block is then going to send an output and powers a little bounce animation to send the cupcake back to Chica, before then setting all of the scoreboards back to normal to start Chica's timer from all over again. So with the cupcake back at position 28 and the speakers turned on, the cupcake will quickly run off again and I don't have to worry about it until the next time that it becomes active. And because the speaker system has a fast usage scoreboard, I can't just open up every camera and use the speakers randomly, I have to make sure that the cupcake is actually there to not waste any power. Speaking of the spotlight, now that Chica's mechanic has been all completed, the next animatronic I want to add is Foxy, who like I just hinted at, is scared away by using the spotlight. My idea is to have something similar to his mechanic in FNAF 2, but to actually make it a fun sequence to be up against. Just like with the cupcake, I've started by setting up the different camera positions that Foxy can be in, as he's also going to be able to move around the pizzeria. Now the reason why there's so many command blocks though is because Foxy himself changes pose in each camera, meaning all of the armor stands need to be adjusted to fit the new rotation values. It took a little while to set all of this up, but I think that some of them are pretty cool in the way that they turned out. It also shows off the scale of the animatronics in a different way, as Foxy is the first character who can appear in a different camera that isn't just a show stage. And though the model itself is pretty big, I still found a way to get Foxy to hide inside of some of the cameras by either just being in a corner or hiding behind a random object. Going back to the spotlight though, this is now the second use that the cameras are going to have, as I need to use it 3 times on Foxy before I'm then able to send him back to stage. To make sure that I'm actually on the same camera as Foxy though, I've made a new scoreboard to detect which camera I'm looking at, so that way I didn't have to manually type each of their coordinates. So if I were on camera 3 and Foxy is also in the same room, this command block is then going to send an output whenever I turn the spotlight on. This other command here is just to make sure that I can't do this after his jump scare timer ends, which is how long I have to find him 3 times. Once powered though, the command block is then going to start a randomizer to roll a number between 2 and 8, which are the other camera positions that Foxy can go to. Now at the same time there's also an added sound effect, but there's also a scoreboard to keep track of how many times that Foxy has been caught. Instead of instantly teleporting back to the stage though the moment that the score reaches 3, it's instead going to move Foxy to a 9th position, which is going to be right outside the office door. I thought it would be more interesting to have Foxy actually appear in front of the player, where I then need to use the flashlight one last time, which is then finally going to deal with him. And to make this encounter even more interesting, I've also set up a quick 7-frame animation to play once I catch Foxy a final time, where he's going to cover up his eyes and then backs away from the door. So to see this all together in action, Foxy is going to start out in one camera and then is going to move to another whenever I shine the light on him. Then once I've found him 3 times in total, he's then going to appear at his last position just outside the office, where I just need to check the doorway by shining the flashlight, which is then going to cause him to back away. That's then going to lead to him teleporting back to the stage, where his timer has now reset. And just like with Bonnie, a randomizer is going to decide whether Foxy is going to return after 50 seconds, 55 seconds, or 60 seconds. Once he does become active again, I have another 60 seconds to catch Foxy all 4 times. Even though the jump scare itself is pretty much the same as all of the others, I did have to change the way that the commands themselves power, as just like with the camera system, the jump scare also has to move parts of Foxy around as he's moving his head for the animation. Once again, this leads to the game over room, and exiting it just restarts the game again. And Foxy is now actually the first animatronic who can jump scare me without doing anything at all, as there's no extra requirement for him to jump scare me. With Bonnie and Chica, I have to either be looking at them or avoid looking at them, but Foxy is going to get inside the office no matter what. This now brings me to the 4th and final animatronic of my fan game, who is of course Freddy himself. I've left it until last, as to be completely honest, I wasn't entirely sure on how he was actually going to work. However, I now have a really good idea in mind, and I think I might have just made him the most annoying of the 4. Also yes, I finally gave him his microphone after forgetting this entire time. Not that it really matters at this point, as he isn't going to be holding it for very long. Much like with Foxy, Freddy will wander around the building after a random amount of time passes. Now there's also a position for him to appear outside of the doorway, but we'll take a look at that more later. When Freddy enters a room, his footsteps are going to be heard across the building by using this play sound command, while another randomizer is going to power, which is going to decide how long Freddy is going to be inside the room for. On top of that, there's a second randomizer that's going to roll a 1 or a 2, which is where Freddy's mechanic is actually going to start. Instead of being an active threat like everyone else, Freddy is going to start messing around with the camera system by either draining the power or breaking the speakers. So if his randomizer lands on 1 while he's at his 3rd position and I'm at the same camera as him, he's then going to start draining from the spotlight timer. However, if his randomizer lands on 2, the exact same type of commands are going to power, only that this time he's going to start draining from the speaker system. The only way to stop either of these from happening is to completely avoid being on the same camera that Freddy is at. And that's obviously going to be a huge problem with the Cupcake and Foxy both running around the building at the same time. If the speaker breaks, I won't be able to stop Chica from getting me, and if the lights break, well, something a little different is going to happen. But how am I supposed to know which system Freddy is messing with without being on the same camera as him? Well, along with the footsteps, if Freddy is using the speakers, a music box song is going to play, which can then be heard throughout the entire building, including the security office. Then if Freddy is draining the power, not only is he not going to play the music box, but his eyes are also going to be glowing in the dark with these two particle effects placed right in front of his eyes. Now if Freddy ends up breaking the speaker system, it's simply just not going to work for the rest of the night. But if he breaks the light battery, it's also going to drain the power of the entire building. This is pretty much my excuse to make a power out sequence, as it's something that I thought would be pretty cool, while also mixing things up so that way Foxy doesn't just instantly break in. So if Freddy is active, meaning his score is positioned at 3 or above, and the light power scoreboard matches 0, it's then going to activate this command block here to power these 3 chain of command blocks, where it's then going to reset all of the scoreboard timers for Chica, Foxy, and Bonnie. Then right after that, a randomizer is going to decide how long Freddy's power out song is going to last, which just makes the situation more tense and less predictable. But either way, once it does end, it's of course going to lead to the jump scare. And this one's a little different than the others, as instead of just picking up the player, Freddy looks over them before his final bite attack. But this isn't the only way that Freddy can jump scare me, as there's another mechanic that brings us back to something I brought up earlier. And that's if Freddy is standing at the doorway while his eyes are glowing. Freddy's the only character who can go to every single room, including parts and service, as well as the doorway beside me. Now while he won't do anything if he stands there playing his music box, he will immediately attack me if I use the light while his eyes are glowing. Obviously this doesn't happen if the door is closed, but I thought I'd still bring this up just in case. But that now wraps up the mechanics for all 4 animatronics, where I honestly think I did a really good job mixing challenging gameplay together, while also keeping it fun at the same time. I still need to actually play test them all together at the same time, as I haven't done that yet, so just in case something needs tweaking, I'll get all of those changed for the final gameplay. However, you don't need to see any of that, as it's rather repetitive and slightly boring waiting for specific things to happen without me doing it manually. So instead, let's take a look at something more interesting, which is the starting menu for the game itself. And here I decided to take some inspiration from the Help Wanted menus, where it's simply just a random environment inside of a black void. I've done lots of the same kinds of menus recently, so I wanted to change this one up a little bit. So whenever I die and start the game over again, I'm going to be teleported inside of this room, as well as the animatronic models which are each up on the stage, with the title of the game on top of it. Pizza Night felt like a fitting name considering this is only going to be 1 night long, and it takes place inside a pizza-shaped pizza place during the night. Aside from that though, the only thing to do here is to click on this interaction entity to start the game itself, which is then going to power a few command blocks behind this wall. This first row of commands here is what teleports the animatronics back on stage, while also starting a quick intro cutscene which you'll see in just a few minutes. But after it ends, this second chain of command blocks is going to power, which is then what finally teleports me inside the office and powers all of the animatronic systems to finally start the night. Another slightly important thing that starts is the time system itself, which is going to count the hours to 6 AM. Instead of having a digital clock on the cameras though, or just attached to my sidebar, there's an analog clock on the wall which is made up of an armor stand holding a lever. Every hour lasts exactly 1 minute, and the armor stand's hand is going to rotate to move the handle 30 degrees from 12 o'clock all the way to 6 o'clock, which is how I'll be able to tell what the time is. Not only that though, but once again messing around with the windows and the skylight, the actual daylight cycle is going to change as well, meaning the sky is going to start at midnight and will keep on changing until it reaches sunrise. We might not be able to see the sun itself, but the pizzeria will start getting brighter and brighter the closer I get to beating the night. This is something that I've never seen a fan game do, but I think it will make the gameplay feel a lot more involved. So with that, all of the gameplay mechanics and animatronics have been fully added, meaning this map is now 100% completed. This was genuinely so much fun to put together, as it was so nice to use my own creativity to imagine how my own FNAF fan game would work. I've gone ahead and tested it out a few times just to make sure that everything actually works, and I think it's finally time to show off the gameplay. So with that being said, it's finally time to see if I can survive a night of my own FNAF fan game in Minecraft. I hope that you enjoy it, and let's see how we do. Alright, so just under 3 weeks of working on this map later, Pizza Night is all completed and I can now play through the entire game. Now I want to start out by saying with complete honesty, this is not my first time recording this. I've actually been struggling quite a bit now. In fact, I've been recording for 45 minutes, which should show you how surprisingly difficult this is. I have beaten it, I've beaten it a few times by now. However, I am kind of glad that it is difficult, so that way it's not boring, especially since this is only one night long. So it's going to start out slow. First of all, only Bonnie's going to be active, like right there. I'm going to wait for Bonnie to get as close to the door as possible, as quickly as possible. That way I don't have to worry about him once all the other animatronics become active. Bonnie's not that big of a problem, but with that being said, since he's constantly there, you always want to go back to the office just to check where he is. It's a better music box, honestly. A lot of the mechanics in this map were taken inspiration from actual FNAF mechanics, but I wanted to make them, in my opinion, better. Which I don't know if I did. I'll be curious to see what your thoughts are in the comments. Especially that this is my first time doing something like this. That's the cupcake. You could hear that I did add sound effects to each of them, so that way it would be easier to know. Whatever, the door. I don't really need it right now anyway, so it's not too big of a deal. But there we go, they're all back on stage. So right now, we've had Chica active once, we've had Bonnie active once, and it's 1 AM. So what I'm going to do while I wait for the other animatronics, I added a few extra things in my free time, just like a little bit of a theme song for each of the figures on the monitors. I thought it'd just be a fun thing to add in quickly. There's no nose for me to honk or any poster to click on, so those are going to be the replacements for that. Which again, it's just a little fun detail I thought I could add. This is my map, I do whatever I want, no one's going to stop me from doing anything. Right, Foxy should be next. I'm going to wait for him. Bonnie is getting a bit close. And once again, Foxy does have sound cues, so I'll be able to know when he's left, and like right there he is. Actually, I believe that is Chica, yeah. There we go. I'm glad I'm finding the cupcake fast, actually, because that has been the biggest concern so far. Whatever. Right, Foxy will be soon. There we go, right there. Alright, you probably move to the kitchen. There he is. Go ahead and use the spotlight. There we go, one more. Yeah, by himself, not that big of a problem. However, once they all become active, that's when it starts to get very annoying, especially when Freddy is blocking the camera you want to be in. Now, speaking of Freddy, I do need to be careful when actually using the flashlight on the doorway. One time, he immediately spawned right in front of the doorway with his eyes glowing and just killed me the moment I used the flashlight, which I wasn't expecting to happen, but I should have expected is actually a possibility to happen. So we're at 2 AM right now, doing pretty good. I believe that is Chica, yep. Alright, where's Bonnie at? And there's Freddy, alright. There we go, now it's actually gonna start getting real. I need to find... you are just in range. If you can get a little bit closer, please. Not actually in my office, okay. There's Foxy as well, and the cupcake. Thank God they're both on the same camera. They were hiding each other, but with that being said, I'm still glad that we found both. There we go, and Foxy one more time, wherever you went. See, I have to race through all of these cameras just to find him. I still struggle. There we go. Get you there. And gone. I still find that mechanic really cool there. The way he just slowly backs away from the door there. Again, small things like that. I'm really proud of how this map turned out. Alright, let's try not to use the cameras too much. Although, with that being said, I don't want to be on the same camera as Freddy, obviously. But I also want to make sure that I'm not missing out on sound cues. Well, there goes the idea of using that camera. Freddy's there, I'm just gonna have to be quick with it in that case. Yeah, they're both still there. Alright, that door's active again. Chica's active as well. It's 4 AM, yep. Bonnie's there. Chica, where would the cupcake be? I was hoping it would be in the office, but it looks like that's not going to be the case. I really hope that the cupcake is not in the main camera. I really hope it's not on the stage. Thank God it's just right there. Okay, good. Good. I'm getting lucky with the cupcake spawns here, actually. I have been incredibly unlucky recently with them, actually, so I'm glad that I've been able to find them quicker than not. Alright, I'm just gonna just quickly open and close this camera. I know I shouldn't be on the same camera as Freddy, but also at the same time, like right there, I missed a sound cue for Foxy. I don't know how long he's been active for. Where is Foxy? There. That's not good. I don't know how long Foxy's been active for. Alright, good. Okay, managed to deal with him just in time. That's good. And luckily, Freddy hasn't been at the door either. That's getting quite lucky with this. There's no RNG in here. I mean, sometimes, obviously, like, Foxy will cover up the cupcake, but it's not completely impossible to avoid things like that. Like, it's not guaranteed that you're going to lose the night just because of that. Alright, Chica's become active one more time. Let's see where it's at. Hopefully, I can continue to get lucky. Should probably check the office first. Of course, it won't be here. No, Bonnie is just about at the office door. Soon, any second now. Right there, right on the speaker. Not the speaker, but right there. And, close this door. Get that door closed. We're very close. I believe that was Foxy as well. Okay. Let's try find Foxy. I hear him. No, good. Okay, good. There we go. I managed to get that done. Really cool. It is a very satisfying gameplay loop. It is very difficult. I got quite lucky there with all the spawns of the cupcake. However, that is incredibly fun. I really do hope that you enjoyed it, as it was a lot of fun to build this map, and it was even more fun to play it myself. Now, before we take a look at the jump scares for each of the animatronics, I do want to bring up the fact that I did add some credits to the map menu screen, which is something that I only do if I make a world available to download. And that's because for the rest of the year, I'm going to making all of my projects available for download if the channel can reach 200,000 subscribers before the end of the year. This is my first time setting up a sub goal like this, so if you want to play not only this map, but also every other map I make for the rest of the year, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel as it helps support me and lets me make more cool stuff like this in the future. And one last thing that I completely forgot to mention as well is the fact that this entire map was made by only using 1,690 command blocks, which is a whole lot less than I was expecting it to be. I'm still very excited to see what you think about this map, as it's ended up being my favorite project that I've ever worked on. So if you want to see me do more custom fan games like this in the future, make sure to let me know down in the comments below. But with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the jump scares. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that is now going to wrap it up for today's video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it and are excited to see more builds like this in the future. If you are, then remember to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on, so that way you know the next time I upload, and can also help reach the sub goal of 200,000 subscribers before the end of the year, where I'll then be putting all of my worlds up for download just like this one. But with that being said, thank you everyone so much for watching, and I will of course see you in my next video.